This episode is brought to you by novel Til The Bitter endemic. What if there was a happy ending to a pandemic? Perhaps an unexpected love story. After Daisy gets thrust into mandatory quarantine for an infection she can't explain, it's up to her to unravel the truth as to what's behind it and what she can ultimately do to escape it. But she can't do this alone, and that's where she finds not only herself, but a very special person that opens their heart for the betterment of their survival. Find out how in Til The Bitter endemic, coming soon.
Greetings and salutations, all you beautiful people, and welcome to another episode of Art of the Beholder, a show dedicated to all things eclectic in the world of art. I'm your host, Novo, and today we're going to be talking about art in music in the second part of a three-part series we are calling Radiohead's Music Theory Trilogy, focusing on albums In Rainbows, The King of Limbs, and A Moon-Shaped Pool. Today we'll be discussing The King of Limbs. To do so, we are once again joined by our executive, our exclusive, our senior correspondent. That is Mr. Theodore T. Buckingham, my favorite Buck Pie. Welcome back to the show.
Thanks. I appreciate it. I am your lotus flower. Let's talk about an album, an interesting album.
Very interesting, often considered a weaker entry. I have seen the worst of the worst toxic communities call this the worst Radiohead album on the webs, on the YouTubes,
on the internets,
on the Reddits,
on the Reddits,
and I have a bone to pick with them because I don't think there's such a thing as a worst Radiohead album. There is an opportunity for change. There is an opportunity for growth. There is an opportunity for a lot of different things. There are weaker and stronger entries, but collectively, respectfully, relatively, worst is a strong word.
Yeah, I think it's a little strong. Weakest? No. They have had a weak... Their first album was definitely their weakest album.
Most people, yeah. When I feel like those same YouTube commenters, MySpace communities, all the interwebs, I feel like when we were doing our homework for the show, they would get into arguments about that.
Yeah.
What is more worse?
Well,
Pablo Honey or The King of Limbs?
Yeah, and it's funny because this album, if you look at, it's funny. We've had, when this first came out and we saw the rating of it, this is their lowest.
Flabbergasted. Yes.
This is their lowest rated album.
And I want you to hold your first impression for the discussion section because I do want to hear, because we were not together when we first heard the album. So
No.
I don't actually, it's great for the show because I don't actually know how you felt immediately. So I'm excited to hear that and we can talk shop. And then, of course, we'll talk music. But before we do that, let's give the people a primer. So if you're jumping into the second part of the three-part series and you haven't listened to the first part, what are you doing? Go back. God, come on.
Go
man.
back.
Listen. Go back. Just
Stop.
Click right
Just
here.
pause.
Stop it. Just okay.
Pause.
And then go back and then
Pause.
come back. Now, if you're gonna listen to it anyways, let me give you a little primer about as to why we're calling this audio essay, this three-part series, the Music Theory Trilogy. Because there's a lot of trilogies in music history. Think of your favorite band, think of some of the greatest bands of all times. There is gave it a lot of forethought. They were going to plan a set of albums in threes, a trilogy of albums that are meant to be held together, listened together. They stand as a whole. Sometimes it's subconscious. They don't mean to. It just kind of comes out that way. Sometimes it's a complete accident. Well, we happen to think that these three albums, again, In Rainbows, The King of Limbs, and A Moon-Shaped Pool, all are held together. They are a holy trinity of Radiohead albums. We are calling it the Music Theory Trilogy because each one stands as a staple for the basic building blocks that is music, which is melody, rhythm, and harmony. The King of Limbs, the middle child of this trilogy, has an emphasis on rhythm, and we'll talk about why here in a moment, and talk about how it connects to the other three albums, and why it, again, I think accidentally became a bridge between In Rainbows and A Moon-Shaped Pool, and for very good reason. Most importantly, we're going to also give you a reason to give this album another try and give it a lot more appreciation. With that being said, let's dig in a little deeper. So after In Rainbows, it was clear that the band wanted to take a number of risks again. They
Yeah.
went from doing their version of arena style songs within Rainbows, they're very epic, to something smaller. So of course, being Radiohead, they changed musical directions again, and so led them to creating the King of Limbs. And when I think of the album, one phrase does come to mind, and I already said it, and this is no pun intended, of course, again, and that phrase is opportunity for growth. But probably not the kind you're thinking of. So when you actually listen to these compositions, for that first listen, that first reaction, don't make a video, okay? There's enough of those guys. So these compositions, when you listen to it for the first time, they're very raw, they're very rhythmic, they're wild. There's a hint of carnal, infantile, and again, no pun intended, feral nature to these compositions, just begging to be remixed, redesigned, rethought, just a playground of ideas we've never quite seen before in Radiohead until now. And what's great about this album when it comes to that idea is that even they themselves, Radiohead, decided to have a field day that their own songs were indeed a playground for growth. So when they rearranged the pieces for live versions of these compositions, it created another level of depth we couldn't even realize was possible when you heard the studio comps alone. The potential so great that probably even the members of Radiohead themselves couldn't quite realize at the time. So we're excited to talk shop with you guys today. Before we do, of course, we all need a little background. The album was released on February 18, 2011. First as a download, of course, since it was self-released, and then it was followed by a physical release in March of that same year. This is the 8th studio album and the shortest to date, following, of course, as already stated, In Rainbows and preceding A Moon-Shaped Pool. It was produced by longtime collaborator Nigel Goodrich, and the pieces were constructed through mostly sampling and looping of live instrumentation. So there was a hybrid approach here, guys. The album artwork was again designed by longtime collaborator Stanley Donwood, and of course, as he likes to do sometimes, Tom York himself. Now, before we talk all things music and why you guys need to give this album another try, and hopefully by the end of this conversation, you'll have a little bit of a better appreciation for this middle child of this trilogy. But first, I want to hear Buck's first reaction. We weren't even in the same state at the time, but we were listening at the same time in a way.
Do you remember I called you?
I want to say it was a text message first because they did a surprise drop again.
They did a surprise drop, and I think I remember specifically because it was snowing where I was at. I texted you, you need to call me right now. And you did, and I could not. I was so excited, and
when Buck does this too, it's like I think like he was in an accident. Yeah. So I kind of wish he would give me a primer. Like, no, nothing's wrong. Call me immediately, Novo.
So this is young Buck and his first kind of job, his career,
his King of Limbs phase, his infantile feral phase.
Right out of college, he's getting up. He's checking the interwebs. He's beep boop bop boop.
Beep boop bop boop.
Getting on the internet machine,
and he comes across a certain album.
He's on a mailing list.
By his favorite band.
He's on a mailing list, and he stops and looks at it for a second, and it says Radiohead surprise drop of album King of Limbs, and I have to be at work in like 10 minutes.
Oh no. Oh God. Oh no.
And I'm freaking out because I'm like,
I got to listen to this.
I need to listen to this. Who cares about molding the minds of the future of America? I need to listen to this goddamn album.
Yeah, it's more important. It was. Yep.
It was more important. Yeah, I couldn't listen to it all day. I was really, really, really like, it was like a kid on Christmas Day. Because remember at the time, kids, In Rainbows was such a huge hit, like gigantic hit. And that was
a hard act to follow.
It's a hard act to follow, but at the same time, people were wanting. We had heard some things come out. Tom York had released a single in between there. I cannot remember. I have the vinyl of it.
Well, he did the Eraser.
He did the Eraser in 2006. He released
something of boxes or something. I remember he did like surprise drop of a solo record. I don't think it was.
Yeah, I'm trying to look it up.
It doesn't matter. What was so you listen? Eventually, you listen to the whole album.
Yeah,
and how did you feel?
Whoa, this is different. Okay. That was my first reaction. Was
very different. But
very different
from Radiohead. They like to throw us curveballs.
They throw curveballs, and this was a big curveball. This was like in a total another direction. This, when I first heard it, I go, oh, they went totally experimental again.
Yeah,
it's kind of
exactly.
like when actors, they say, hey, I made that one movie for you, now this, and then I make one just for me. This felt like
that for them.
That was that for them. Like maybe for one or two people though.
I like that.
Remember what I first said when you first heard it, and the first thing I said to you?
I don't. So remind even me.
I said this is Tom York with Radiohead.
I do. Oh my god, it's coming back. It's flooding back. You said it was Tom York and the Radioheads.
Yeah, in the
This is Tom York and the Radioheads. This is what it feels like another solo album, but as Radiohead.
Yeah, and that's what I immediately thought. Okay,
yeah, that's an apt
come at me
constructive.
For that?
That's an apt constructive criticism.
Yeah, but it was not. It very much felt like the second solo album from Tom York. I've changed my mind a little bit, but
yeah, I think especially we'll get to this when they rearranged the pieces themselves. I hinted at this a little bit in the intro, but when they had to rearrange their own pieces to create live renditions so they could tour on it and support it, it did become a completely new beast. And we'll get to that. So put a pin in that, because I still want to talk first impressions. Because my first impression, and you can probably piggyback on a lot of these feelings, is, man, I remember listening to it and wanting so bad to like it and even love it, and I couldn't, because I wanted more. I remember the album was so short. I really
the shortest album they've ever released.
Yeah, to date. And I almost felt like it was an EP. I didn't feel like it was a proper LP outing by Radiohead. And part of that is they had been raising the bar for so long from their own discography. And that's why, this is probably a good time to take out the pin on the concept of calling things the best versus worst in their own discography.
Yeah.
Yes, there's challenging and less challenging outings. There's weaker and stronger, but worst and best is a strong way to put it, because one, it's so subjective, and two, we're always comparing it only based on the relativity of their own discography. Because I remember saying to you about the same time, we had finally listened to the albums a few times, and we finally had our monthly hour to 2 hour phone conversation. So again, guys, we're having these talks even before we started recording ourselves.
Yep.
And I remember saying to you things like, I wish it was longer. I'm wanting more. I know deep down that, yes, based on their discography, is it a more challenging, more experimental, more risky album? Absolutely. Is it a little weaker compared to their other outings? It's up to debate. I would probably say yes, but I would always end with this sentiment. I would be like, but Buck, compared to all the other music that's coming out right now, this is dramatically better. So when you actually compare it to all music, not just Radiohead's discography, it was so much more. It was still refreshing in a way, but we would only get those refreshing moments a few times in the album versus an entire album like in Rainbows.
There was somebody said this on a Radiohead forum, kind of a retrospective of what people think about this. Which, by the way, folks, this is the most polarizing Radiohead album amongst
easily,
Radiohead,
because some people love it after we talk about this a lot on the show. Art takes time, especially experimental art, and Radiohead's always been a little ahead of their time. We knew that it was probably going to take about this time for people to be like, oh my God, I think this is some of their best work.
Mm-hmm.
I have a version of that argument, but I'm going to again save that for a little later.
Somebody wrote, and that kind of stuck with me about this album, and they said, if this wasn't a Radiohead album, it would have been a cult classic. And
I like that, because we're comparing it to all their other work.
Yeah, and what I brought up earlier, and by the way, I hate Pitchfork. Okay,
well, but we love them.
We love
to hate them,
but we
kind of hate to love them.
It's not a hate to love; it's a love to hate. But and I'm not saying that they are the holy things. But if you talk, the gospel here. But if you talk about a magazine or a music review site that absolutely loves every single thing Radiohead does, every single album that they have, sans Pablo Honey, has always been like
they like to S some D's over there for Radiohead.
Yes,
for sure.
Yes. Thank you. Yes, I was trying to.
They love the SMBs.
So let me run this down here. So, for example, Kid A, this was
like 10 out of 10.
It was a 10 out of 10. Okay, this is what they gave King of Limbs. 7.9.
Actually, I feel like that's generous for them.
I think when we talked about this, because I remember you saying, did you check what Pitchfork gave it? And I was like, yeah, it was like a 7.9. I know the remix they gave 6.0. That's what I remember. But I said, you know what? This is the lowest rated album they've ever had, but there's a ton of bands that would kill to have that rating.
That would kill to have a 7. Because, yeah, it's relative, too. So a 7.9, anything, a 7 to an 8 on Pitchfork is a 9 to 10 anywhere else.
Yes. Thank you. Yeah.
Yes.
It's very hard to get over 9.0.
It's hard to get over 8.
What
Anything
is it?
8 is like 100 over 100%. You got extra credit on the test.
Yeah. I think it's one of those things I knew when it came out that it would take some time to process.
And it was always going to be polarizing. I think we always knew it was going to be this way.
Yeah, and somebody else said too, I read this a long time ago, that it's like every Radiohead album. I don't know really what to think until about the 9th or 10th listen.
Oh, yeah. You got to give it time.
You have to give it time, and then it ends up being, I think you said last one that you're not a huge fan of Hail to the Thief.
Or Amnesiac, really. That little middle bit between Kid A and Rainbows, I'm like, it's a solid okay.
But I love both of those albums.
I know.
And here's the thing. I still struggle a little bit with The King of Limbs.
I still struggle too, and again, we will get to this by the time we hash out the entire album and everything that came from it, because I think, I believe Philip Selway said this, so that's the drummer of Radiohead, that they wanted to create a series of pieces that had the opportunity for mutation. And I think I didn't want to rephrase that or summarize it, or, I didn't want to give my version of what he said. I think that's a perfect way to really start the conversation and talk about the music, because this really breathes that idea. So let's get into it. Let's talk about, again, this is only 8 tracks, 37 minutes, 34 seconds, depending on the type you're listening to. It could be a 3740. But it opens with track number 1, Bloom. Open your mouth wide, the universal sigh. We hear that, again, very strong rhythmic emphasis right away. And I'm not sure if you may have realized this subconsciously, but for the people that may not know, there's a pulse, there's a rhythmic pulse, and the main drum line is it's a little in front of that, and it was written that way. Neil Peart used to do this all the time with Rush. It creates a driving rhythm to the overall composition, whereas Johnny Greenwood, who often plays just the snare when they play this live, is just a little behind the main beat of the pulse. So it's already polyrhythmic, but because there's one driving the pulse and one dragging the pulse a little bit, if you're wondering why you feel uneasy with some of these pieces, it's music theory usage just like that, pretty much sprinkled throughout the entire album. Yeah, it's because you immediately feel unease, this like wild instinctual feeling. You don't know why there's such a tribalness to it with the rhythms. That's why.
My partner at the time, I think her response was, "This gives me anxiety."
In a good way.
In her, yeah, you remember her, but like. She was not as into this kind of stuff as I was. I listened to this for the first few days a lot.
Oh yeah, we have to listen to it in an excessive amount. And there's this inherent like pessimism in the lyrics. Like it's already rhythmic and it's already dark, and we see that in the album art, right? There's a series. Yeah. There's like a pair of like essentially ghosts on the cover. Stanley
very eerie.
Donwood's very eerie, very creepy.
The whole album is eerie,
and I feel like it mirrors the vibe, the tone of the style of the music as well. And much like to the lyrics, open your mouth wide, the universal sigh. And they had promotional do you remember the marketing for this shit, Tom?
Oh, I have it. I have a lot.
Oh yeah, Buck has the actual universal sigh newspaper that Tom York was giving out on really the like corner of London and shit like that, which is so great.
I have the newspaper. I don't know where it's at right now. It's somewhere in stores.
Oh God, he's in trouble, guys.
So I have the newspaper, and then I also got the special edition clear vinyl, 10-inch.
Right.
Still hated when they went through that phase where they made the smaller vinyls, but okay. And then it had like this special compostable plastic or something like that. Anyway, it's got like a interesting sticker thing. I haven't figured out what exactly it is, but I remember that this was one of the first like special edition vinyls I ever bought. But the promotion for this was very interesting.
What a snowball. I feel like you have a million of them.
Oh yeah, my Kendrick Lamar.
Yeah, you have a problem.
Well, I have all. I showed my friend the other day, and he was like, "I go, oh, this is Damn," and he goes, "Well, what's that on the cover?" And I go, "That's Kendrick's signature." And And he goes, no way. I was like, yeah, like I've got those too. Very important. I have many leather-bound books.
He's a big deal, guys.
I'm a big deal. But like, yeah, it's a problem. I just ordered another one.
And that brings us to track number 2, Morning, Mr. Magpie. I swear to God, I had to look up the lyrics because every time I heard the song, since Tom York uses his vocal much like a instrument, sometimes it's hard to make out exactly what he's saying. And I always thought he was saying, you stole it, instead of you stole it all, you stole art. I thought you stole art, give it back. I thought he was talking about his art or someone's art, and then I later learned that he was saying all and not art. You stole it all.
Well,
and things like that.
Some of the way he his affect and how he kind of projects and pronounces some words. Like there's been times, and when I've went back and looked at lyrics, and I thought he said one thing, and for years I've been saying the wrong word along with it. But yeah, it's an interesting thing. I was looking back through the lyrics too of it, and I think I had the same. There's a few of them I was like, oh, that's what he was saying.
That's what he's saying. Yeah.
Yeah, and I was like, oh, I thought he was.
We do that a lot.
It's only been like 13 years since this album came out. Another interesting one. This was the one when I first heard it, I was like, okay, we're getting kind of back into what I thought. It's got a really interesting like little guitar thing going on.
Yeah,
here.
very much, very, very interesting. And again, much like we did in Rainbows, of course, these are songs, guys. There's still melody and harmony and the other building blocks that make music, but the emphasis is still so rhythmic.
Can I
take us
I'm
through
sorry.
a T-Buck tangent?
Yeah. I just thought of this.
Take us.
Do you think
guys.
this is the blueprint for the Smile, some of this album?
Yes and no. I feel like probably the 3 collection of albums, these 3 that make the holy trinity of music theory, probably did. Maybe a little bit. But I hear a lot of, I think it's, again, a lot of Tom York doing the driving, much to your joke of it's Tom York and the Radiohead. Because if you think of Atoms for Peace, that is the very rhythmic side of, whereas the Smile is such more of a jazzy, experimental, a little shoegazy, side too. He's got many sides.
He's very interesting. Most interesting man in the world.
Track number 3 is Little by Little, and this is punctuated by a guitar figure that ground, 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 go. Ground, 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 go. And it creates this droning kind of trance-like effect to the rhythm. And when they would write a lot of their non-traditional rhythmic parts, so guitar, bass, it would end up being very rhythmic again. And this is the epitome of that, I think, is Little by Little's guitar figure. I actually looked up how it was played, and when I see young kids just doing a tutorial of Little by Little, they're doing everything on the upswing, reggae style. But to me, it sounds like 3 downs and 1 up. It sounds like down, down, up, down, down, up. So I could be wrong, or they could be wrong. I don't know. As someone correct
pun
us.
intended.
Oh, nice.
This was the first song I kind of fell in love with.
Where you kind of liked it. Yeah.
Yeah.
I feel like this is where people were like, okay, I'm starting to get it.
Yeah. It felt more like a Radiohead, like that I was kind of used to, but like the layers of sound, like you just said, like one thing too, folks, if you're getting in the Radiohead and I talk to people when they're first getting into it, the best way to listen to their albums, especially after OK Computer, you have to listen to them with headphones, because you really get like
there's a lot going on.
There's a lot going on, but it's like it works. It's almost like a
you have to be immersed.
Yeah,
you have to be
it's immersion.
You have to be fully in the pool. Go ahead and put your head down for a little bit too. You can't dip a toe in. Be fully immersed in the sound, and you will be with track number 4's Feral, as already joked about. Now, I will say this about Feral. If I'll use an analogy, Buck, you'll like this one. If Weird Fishes on In Rainbows was the epitome of a melodic track, remember that was the melody album, this track is the epitome of rhythmic.
I was actually wanting to ask you about this because of the drum, the beat through this, and what you thought about it as a percussionist,
as a rhythmic theorist. I feel like that's fancier.
Rhythmic theorist.
Rhythmic theorist.
You're a very important person.
I have leather-bound books too. Now, it's a series of what we call polyrhythms in rhythmic theory. So a polyrhythm is when you can use either it's in a different time signature, or there's syncopation, coordination, and syncopation, or layered versions of all of the above. So you can have the most common one as a 3/2, like where, God, I wish I could like do a little tutorial or like tap on my counter, but I actually think it would be, because this is just audio only, it would probably sound annoying. But look, guys, just YouTube 3/2 polyrhythm or 2/3 polyrhythm. Now you can add that in any set of layers or versions of putting the rhythms. And then if you want what we call different voices or different color, you're using different instruments or different percussion to create different rhythmic phrases. So you can use a cowbell, you can use maracas, shakers. There's a lot of different voicings, a lot of different colors to create the polyrhythms. But when you put them all together, we make things like Feral. How was that? Oh, he's clapping. Thank you.
Great answer. From my end, when I listen to this too, because I'm a bassist.
He's the other. We can barely hear him ever, right? We can barely hear Buck because it's so low, so low. No, well, that's. I mean, people. When you think of a band, there's a section we always call the rhythm section, and usually in 3 and 4 pieces, it's just the bass and the drums together. That's the rhythm section, guys. If you ever now in orchestras, the rhythm section can be huge, but this is the basic building blocks for when we just have a small contemporary band of a 3-piece or 4-piece or 5-piece. In this case, of 5.
What I was going to say is from this though, rhythmically, this is by far, and I think a lot of Radiohead heads also agree with this. I love saying that. I don't know why.
Radiohead heads. Oh, I like it.
Heads. This is Colin's like best bass work out of any of the albums that he's ever done.
Ooh, elaborate.
No, just again, the focus was this is, and again, we've already said this, but this is their least melodic album and most rhythmic album, and I think that just goes to what you just said. The whole rhythm section, this was a focus on a lot of that throughout this album. So just his bass lines are, I felt like this was kind of the one he kind of stepped up. Not saying that he hasn't in other.
And Separator, that's a great bass line.
That's exactly the one I was thinking of. But yeah, it just he just kind of shines through in this. To me, at least, he did a lot more than I'd noticed in other albums.
And it's a great bridge. We talk about that, when we think of albums as their own, complete composition. We're talking about 3 albums as a complete trinity of compositions, but all of these albums stand alone. Feral is the bridge to the second half of the album. And we get that with the first single, Lotus Flower. And I will say this about Lotus Flower. I feel like this song has the most pop sensibilities I've seen out of Radiohead since, and we're going to use this analogy again, Pablo Honey's Creep, honestly.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, it's definitely the most memeable.
Oh my God. Well, that's because of the video and his
the video,
sweet, sweet dance moves.
Yeah. I remember
Napoleon Dynamite, sweet dance moves.
Yeah. It's Tom York dancing was a gif that you just saw.
That keeps giving.
You still see to this day. I saw it the other day. Somebody did something on the Talkatics. It did like they basically did his dance.
Oh my God, are they still doing the memes to this? They're still doing the dances?
Every once in a while you'll see something. Because like I said, Radiohead kind of is making a mini comeback a little bit just because the kids are finding out about it.
When you listened to Lotus Flower for the first time, Buck, didn't you feel it was like, this is the most poppy song from Radiohead I've heard in the longest time? And it's weird that it's on this album, which is the least user-friendly album of their entire discography too.
Yeah, it was the only catchy song on this. Like it was the only like somewhat positive, even though it's, I think, in still a minor key like song the whole time. Like, so it's to me it just stuck out like a sore thumb. And what's crazy is the next track, Codex, a beautiful ballad that stuck out in the best way possible, and it was not poppy at all. Well, I mean, it had pop sensibilities, but in that traditional Radiohead way that we were used to, when it was like this piano, Tom York on the piano, using that vocal like an instrument again. And Codex is by far one of my favorite tracks. It's like kind of an exit music, kind of a, it's had those feels where it was like epic, but in like a very rooted way. Was this? I've never looked at this. Was this a song that they had performed before?
I I don't
because
think
it felt
so.
like it came from a different time.
Because this is probably a hint to the third part of our 3-part series, A Moonshaped Pool, which is like a whole album of older tracks that they rearranged for, A Moonshaped Pool.
Yeah, and some tracks that they had released before, like singles or B-sides. And sorry, I know we're not using B-sides, but like like some of their auxiliary, their EP releases, which they did for this too. I like those songs better. I'm already going to say
I like them more. Oh, let's go ahead and plant the seed.
Yeah.
So I like those more and better, however you want to put it. And a lot of them I think should have made the album cut. And a lot of them are even better live.
Yes.
Let's start watering that seed, because the rearranged versions of these songs were, guys, something to behold. But before we get there, we got 2 more on the album. We're
almost there.
I want to talk about the live version so bad, but we're almost there. So track number 7 is "Give Up the Ghost," and this is where, to your point, I feel like this was a Tom York solo song.
Yeah,
and I actually think is probably my least favorite on the whole album, but not the live version.
Really?
Yeah. The studio version of "Give Up the Ghost" is probably my least favorite song on the album as a whole, like as its own body of work. But man, when they did the layered looping vocals on "Give Up the Ghost" for like Live from the Basement and the live versions that we even got to see live, me and Buck, those were special. Those were very special.
That was a really good one live. Yeah, now I'm remembering it. That when we saw them on this tour, I felt like they didn't play too many songs from this album.
No, they did. They did.
Yeah,
but they just had this like perfect mix of other songs along the way. I think that's what, again, to continue to water that seed, again with our tree imagery, since it's the king of limbs, it became something even more special when they rearranged them for the live versions.
Yeah, I always love when they do live stuff, because it's still another performance, even though they can't do all the effects or the layers that they can do before. We've said this last time, is that when they do it live, they come up some really creative and interesting ways of kind of recreating the sounds a lot. So like famously with Kid A, that album with National Anthem, the radio kind of start of it, where you hear the radio in the background, they would live
a real radio,
get a real radio
for feedback,
and hook it up to like a classical station or something like that.
Or before we move on, or Pyramid Song using the bow on a guitar.
Oh yeah, their arrangement of their live version of the Pyramid Song, which you remember that I got a little teary eyed during it.
Got a little teary eyed.
The live version of Pyramid Song to me is almost better than the actual, because they do a little bit different. I love both versions.
I would beg to differ. I would, you want to. You guys, Buck, you want to start some real internet heat? I sometimes think everything in its right place live is better than the studio.
Really?
Ooh. Can you hear the pitchforks coming now? I don't know. It's so dancey.
Flying across the screen.
Everything in its right place live is like a fucking club dance remix versus the Kid A version. But before we go, we're gonna go on a T-Buck tangent board if I don't pull it back. Let me do a Novo pullback. I haven't said Novo pullback in a long time.
Let's do a Novo pullback.
And that brings us to the end of the album, Separator. This is probably a close second. I would say Codex is my baby. It's probably my favorite song on the album. But Separator is like, when we talk about this a lot too with some of our other audio essays on Radiohead, that there's a lot of cross-pollination. There's a lot of DNA. I feel like Separator could have been on a different album somewhere.
This is my favorite song on the whole album.
Okay, so that makes perfect sense. This would be your number one. And and of course, people being fans, just like people are with like Kojima and stuff. When we heard lyrics like, "If you think this is over, then you're wrong," we always thought that like, oh, is there like a second album? Since it was so short, they thought it was like a secret double LP, and then like the other LP was going to be released later, in the year, and then it was going to be together. They would be one giant album, like The Wall or The Fragile or something like that.
We thought that this was like the beginning, and the theories were like people were serious about this, and just thinking that, oh yeah, this is just the first part of it. Don't worry, there's something else coming out next year.
They were so confident, and you know what's crazy is they were kind of right, and I think this is a good segue to the other aux music around it, the remix albums, and then the EP Super Collider, The Butcher, and the Daily Mail Staircase. And there was even a bridge. People forget that there was even a bridge between In Rainbows and the King of Limbs. And you remember Harry Patch in memory of, and our very favorite, These Are My Twisted Words.
I remember just absolutely when These Are My Twisted Words came out, absolutely floored. And I was like, because it felt like you were kind of going down a musical spiral, but in a good way.
Absolutely. It was madness in the best way. Yeah, this song was very special. And I actually thought, just to bring it around circle, this is when they got into this phase where they were releasing music as like, one song every few months, or an EP, like 2 or 3 songs in a little collection, small outing every, few months or so. And because I actually thought, in hindsight, in retrospect, I kind of wish they did that throughout the whole set of years. Like, I feel like the King of Limbs
have, though.
Well, but I feel like the King of Limbs was a proper outing, and I we don't know, we don't have any proof of this, so we're just assuming that probably like there was a management push, or because there was no label behind them, so there was probably somebody saying like, oh, we need to put out an album. But I almost wish that all of these songs were put out in little like EP chunks, because I feel like even with the King of Limbs, you can pair stuff together, because they don't really go together as a cohesive album when you think of the King of Limbs. That's why Philip Selway saying this is an opportunity for Mutation was so, I think, such a perfect way to listen to these compositions, because In Rainbows was like a perfect set of peaks and valleys, where the King of Limbs is like going into a cavern and suddenly it's pitch black and you don't know if you're going up or down, left or right. You see a little light, you go towards it, and suddenly you're deeper in the pit.
Nice.
That's the King of Limbs.
This is the one I've struggled with the most to try to kind of put my thoughts together on.
And yeah, in that vein of Mutation, they gave this music to so many other amazing musicians to be like, we want you to remix it, and they put out TKOL remix 1 2 3 4 5 6 7, and then later remix 8, and then of course that was followed up by, as already stated, two 2-track EPs, which is Super Collider, The Butcher, and the Daily Mail Staircase.
And we heard the Daily Mail live before it was released. Just a nice shot at Rupert Murdoch there.
And that brings us to Live from the Basement. So guys, we've watered for a while. We don't just have a little tree, we have a full-grown, beautiful tree, because as they rearrange their own pieces, the Live from the Basement cuts. And just to I think we haven't said this explicitly yet, but just to put the cherry on top, the icing on the cake, punctuating the fact that this is a rhythm album. This was so rhythmic. They had to tap another drummer, his name was Clive Deemer, of trip-hop band Portishead, to tour with them to recreate these live. And when you heard them live, when they were supporting the album, and this is, again, one of the tours me and Buck got to see them on, though it is often, yes, like I already joked about, people will argue to the ends of fucking time if this or Pablo Honey is the weaker entry. But I will say this, when I heard the live versions of these songs, I felt like this is some of the best work Radiohead has ever done. Ever.
Oh, like Staircase live.
Oh, Staircase live. Fucking kill me.
And that's, I mean,
I actually listened to that right before we went on air.
And I mean, what's fun about it when you watch the Live from the Basement, you can see really how the two drummers are working together on this, and it became kind of a staple.
They're like interlocked, like puzzle pieces. Yeah, before we wrap up this B, I'm going to give you the Live from the Basement, track listing. And I urge you guys to really understand the King of Limbs. You need to understand the live renditions, the live compositions, the live rearrangements. I actually think that is where these songs shine. So Live from the Basement includes track Bloom, The Daily Mail, Feral, Little by Little, Codex, Separator, Lotus Flower, Staircase, Morning Mr. Magpie, great guitar lick on the live version, Give Up the Ghost, and Super Collider. That is the album you need to listen to first.
I'm going to have to agree. I'm just thinking about it when you were saying that, and I was like, you know what?
That is the album.
So
that
I have the
true
DVD.
Album. Yes.
And I think believe it or not, I think I've listened to that more.
Exactly.
Like that way.
I have it ripped onto a CD, the DVD music. I listened to that version of what we should have gotten. Probably, like, if they could have, we can't redo time, we can't undo time, but even probably to them, if I had to guess, they're like, well, this is what we meant to do all along.
And that's okay. And some people are not going to like that answer because I before this,
you hear the pitchforks again.
Well, here's what I saw. I went on a little Reddit.
You went a little rogue. You went a little off-roading.
I just said, people's thoughts on King of Limbs Reddit, and everything I read was like completely underrated album, one of their best. And I was shocked how many people.
A lot of people love this album now.
Top 2 or 3, which I was kind of shocked a little bit because it's kind of goes, everything comes back to Star Wars with me. These are kind of like the prequels versus the original trilogy. How some people really hated those movies, but now like the kids
because of the sequel trilogies, people love them.
Oh yeah, now they're like masterpieces, or like the kids that grew up watching.
Well, I don't know about masterpieces, but they're
no, but that's beloved. What I'm saying is that's what people like say they are. I don't think they're masterpieces. I hate Jar Jar.
Is Jar Jar being some masterpiece?
Jar Jar really was supposed
come
to
after
be,
us. X mob, Twitter mob, Instagram mob.
I don't think they're bad movies, but I don't think they're great either. But like the same thing with this, like some younger folks were like, well, this is like the first Radiohead I ever listened to, and that totally makes sense. It's the same thing when we were kind of learning about
when we
Radiohead.
were wee lads.
People always said there was kind of a joke. There was a meme like before memes. Well, they were still memes, but like people,
they just didn't call it.
You would hear people say like, "I like Radiohead, but I like their earlier stuff better." You would always hear that phrase. That it was always kind of a joke. Like when people would talk about Radiohead, they were really like, "Oh, I'm into it."
Was it you that sent me that video of like it's almost like a Alcoholics Anonymous self-help group, but they're talking about Radiohead albums?
Yes, they're talking about Radiohead albums. Yeah, I can't remember who made that. I haven't watched that.
That was brilliant.
But it was basically every type of Radiohead fan. It's kind of the same with this one. There are some people that are really hardcore about King of Limbs, and I think that's fine. I really do. It's not my favorite.
But we are talking to an audience that may have never heard the King of Limbs too. So obviously this is for those Radiohead fans that love these 3 albums. And the King of Limbs being this rhythmic bridge between the two. But there's also, Riles, I'm looking at you, buddy. There's also people out here that have never, ever heard these, that if they need to hear them for the first time to really appreciate them, and they need to listen to the live versions. But before we get there, guys, we need to tie a bow on this beat, and Buck needs to tell the good people why we need to make the time to appreciate the King of Limbs.
Well, again, with Radiohead, it's always a venture into the new and unknown with them. And this was, again, it was experimental. And it was, to me, it's still part of their catalog. It's still as important as all the other albums. But they took some risks and they took a different direction on some things. And that's always good. I like it. I think a lot of people criticize bands for doing that, and sometimes they do it a little too far in the other direction, and it doesn't always work out. I think this fits perfectly into their catalog.
It definitely did. Again, we didn't get quite the appreciation for In Rainbows until the King of Limbs, and I don't think we got quite the appreciation for the King of Limbs until A Moon-Shaped Pool.
Yeah, so I like this album. Is it on the lower end of what I like in my Radiohead?
Come to expect
a little. But it's still, again, it's got some awesome tracks.
It's transitory.
Yeah.
It's bridging. It's mutation, and it's supposed to be.
And this leads up to a really, in my opinion, great album on the next one that we talk about. So
in the next episode, guys, thank you so much for listening. I want to thank you. I want to thank my guest, Mr. Theodore T. Buckingham, for joining us today. But before we go, we got a little icing on the cake, a little cherry on top with what we call the gem of the week. My gem, you actually accidentally said it in the show. My gem is the live version of Staircase. I think is the absolutely best thing they put out during this era.
It's fantastic. Love that song. I'm going to play it again tonight. A little cocktail before bed.
Little nightcap.
Little nightcap.
Little nightcap of Rooski.
That's great. That's a good one. Well, I said I was going to keep this in the covers realm.
Oh, we're still doing covers. Okay.
So this cover is not by Radiohead, but it's a cover of Radiohead. It's not the postmodern jukebox Haley Reinhart cover of Creep.
Oh, those are good. We like those.
We like that. I actually like that. I really love her voice.
That's a cool YouTube show. Yeah.
It's cool, and I like the twist on things. Check it out.
They didn't sponsor us. We just like them.
Yeah, we just like it. This is a different one. This is my favorite. I think the best cover of a Radiohead song ever. It is. I never can pronounce her name right.
Just spell it then.
Sarah Jarosz, Jarose, Jarosz. I am so sorry, but she is a musician, mainly bluegrass and kind of folk. She does a cover of The Tourist that is absolutely beautiful.
And guys, if you like that, you can always check out our stuff at novadayproductions.com. You can follow us at _Novo and _Day, and Day is DE. And at Nova Day Media, don't forget to like, subscribe, do all the things. And if you'd like to sponsor a little love child or be on the show, you can do so by reaching out to us at novadaymedia@gmail.com and novadayproductions@gmail.com. So until next time, guys, we're going to see you in the next part of this 3-part series where we're covering a moon-shaped pool. But until then, as always, good luck and Godspeed. We love you.
Art of the Beholder is brought to you by Novo Day Productions. Created and hosted by Novo Day and the Novo Day Collective. Facebook.com/Novo Day Media, at Novo Day Media on Twitter and Instagram. Music by A Company. Facebook.com/ACOMusic123. ACO on Spotify. Logo design by Tom Gestus, JESTUS, of thejusticecompany.com. And executively produced by Clayton Anderson. All rights reserved.